I also want to welcome everybody who's watching online or listening to the podcast. It's great to have you join us as well. We are in the middle of a series, if it's your first time or first time in a while, middle of a series called Tough Questions, where we're looking at some of the questions and maybe pushback and resistance that our world has when it comes to matters of faith and Christianity and God and stuff like that. And every single week of this series, we're answering a different question, maybe questions that you have or questions that people you've talked to have. And the first week of this series, we talked about, can we trust what we read in the Bible? Just last week, we heard from our founding pastor, Kevin, as he kind of addressed, man, if God is all powerful and all loving, then why is there so much pain and suffering in the world? And so if either of those are questions that you have had, or again, you just want to know how to defend your own faith a little better, I would recommend you go and catch those online, again, either YouTube or the podcast. And every single week we've mentioned this, but I want to say it again, this series is not meant to be a detailed dive into every nuance and every little detail, and we just don't have time to do that. This is more of kind of a broad brushstroke of these different questions. But if you want to dive into the details, if you want to do some studying on your own, then we want to resource you with that as well. And so you can text the word resources to 651-800-7901. Just the word, nothing else. If you text that will, in about 10 or 15 minutes, then you'll get an email with different books you can read, podcasts you can listen to, YouTube channels you can watch that cover these questions in the series and so many more from a much more intellectual, detailed sort of perspective. And so if you want to dive in deeper, if you want to dive in more detailed, text resources that number. Now, I do have to say that the question we are going to look at today, the thing we're going to talk about, out of anything we're talking about over the next 6 weeks, this is the one that we are just barely going to scratch the surface of. Typically in this series, we've said before, there's like a 30,000 foot view. Today, it might be more accurate to say this is a 30 million foot view. In fact, even preparing for this week, over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, I've just been overwhelmed, with what do we say, what do we talk about, what do we not say, and not because the question today is inherently difficult to answer, but there is just so much research and books and opinions, and this question has been debated for centuries, and there's just an endless supply of things that we could look at. And in fact, every single week as a staff, we go through, what we're going to talk about. And one of the notes I heard on Thursday this week was, man, that was a fire hose of information. Okay, so I hope it doesn't come across that way today, but like Kevin said at the beginning, buckle up, okay, because we're going to be moving pretty fast. That's actually why hopefully every one of you got this half sheet when you came in. If you didn't, the ushers will have them at the back of the room. For everybody online, we will include a link to download this yourself. This is very atypical for us as a church. We don't do this very often, but I just thought because we're going to be covering so much information, maybe writing stuff down is a better way for some of us to learn. Maybe being able to walk away with something would help us kind of pinpoint out of, holy cow, that was a lot of stuff. Here's probably the most important things to remember. So I want to invite you to follow along with that as we go. But the big question for today, the very first thing on the top of the paper is this. What about science? What do we do with science? How should you and I view God in light of scientific discoveries and scientific evidence? And this is really just kind of a grab bag way of saying, what do we do with fossils and the theory of evolution and what we see in the universe and all these different things? We're going to, again, just very broadly, very high level, kind of touch on these sorts of things, because this question of science seems to be one of the premier questions that our world and our culture has today. And not just against Christianity, but actually against faith and God in general. And so the goal for today is not to necessarily prove Christianity. Okay, I want everybody to be aware of that. We are a Christian church. We believe Jesus is the only way to be right with God. But today is not so much about proving Christianity as much as it is about proving a system, a belief of deism. Now, Christianity is all about Jesus. Then under that, you have theism, which is a belief in God or many gods for a whole sort of different, reasons. And then at the very base, kind of the most foundational level you could get is deism, which is a belief in some sort of supernatural entity based on logic and reasoning alone. And so that's the goal for today is to hopefully help us see that deism is an intellectually logical viewpoint to have. And there's three main concepts I want to talk about. There's three big areas to look at when it comes to this. So number one is this: science and religion are not at war. That's number one on your sheet. Science and religion are not at war with each other. There seems to be this idea in our world that if you want to be serious about science, then you can't be serious about religion. And if you want to be serious about religion, then you can't be serious about science. We seem to think that as a culture that, well, science, depends on reason, but religion just depends on faith. And here's the thing that's true about both of these. Both science and religion both depend on reason and both depend on faith. Both of these things need reason and faith to pursue knowledge. If science and religion were really at war, there's just a couple things we got to be honest with ourselves. First of all, when you look at the fathers of the modern scientific movement, people like Johannes Kepler and Euler and Gregory Mendel and Max Planck, all of them were theists at the very minimum, if not outright Christians. Sir Isaac Newton, hugely fundamental in mathematics and physics and, law of gravity, Apple sort of thing. He wrote about his own work. He said, "It would be my greatest desire that if people read my research, if people read what I wrote, if they saw the things that I discovered, that they would be drawn to a belief in God." He would feel like, man, it was the fulfillment of his life's work if his scientific research actually pointed people to God. Science and religion have not been at war in history, and even today in our modern world, they're still not at war with each other. In fact, in the first 100 years of the Nobel Prize from 1901 to 2001, over 60% of the Nobel Prizes were handed out to Christians. Not just theists or deists, but actually outright Christians in the areas of medicine and physics and chemistry especially. The historical and current reality is that you can engage in science seriously, and you can have a deep, strong faith as well. The two are not at war with each other. Additionally, when we think that science and religion are somehow competing against each other, what we do is we misunderstand the fundamental differences or the purposes of each. Both science and religion are about pursuing knowledge and truth. But the way they get there is different. Science is primarily about asking the questions, how? How did it happen? How did this take place? Whereas religion, on the other hand, is primarily about asking the questions, why? There's an example of this I read from a mathematician and an author. His name is John Lennox. And he says, imagine your Aunt Matilda. I don't know why he picked that name, but imagine your Aunt Matilda baked a cake. You could take that cake to all the top scientists of the world and have them evaluate and do experiments and take little pieces. And these scientists could tell you all about the protein structures and the subatomic bonds, and they could tell you how the rising agent works and all the different chemical compounds combined. They could write you a very thorough scientific explanation of how this cake came to be. But you know what no scientist could ever do? Tell you why the cake was made. Only Aunt Matilda knows why it was made. Was the cake made for a wedding, for a birthday, for a graduation party? Only she is the one who can tell you why. And so it's not at all an insult to scientists or the scientific method or the great research being done today to say that science on its own gives us an incomplete picture. There are truths, there are knowledge, there are incredible things that we can learn from science. but it's not the whole story. We should seek to know how the cake was made and also why the cake was made. Aunt Matilda's the creator of the cake, just like we believe that God is the creator of the universe. We can seek to know how the universe was made and why the universe was made at the same time. Science and religion are not at war. They complement each other. And we do ourselves and our world and our scientific community and our religious community disservices when we pit these two against each other. So that's number one. Science and religion are not at war. Number two is this. There is a difference between methodology and philosophy. That's number two on your sheet. There is a difference when it comes to scientific methodology versus scientific philosophy. The scientific method, if you remember back to 7th grade science class, is all about forming a hypothesis, running experiments to test that hypothesis, and then looking at the evidence. That's methodology. But scientific philosophy is a person's own opinion of how they interpret the evidence. The two are completely different. And here is something that I think many of us miss that we need to keep in mind. It's the little italics under number two. Scientific statements are not the same as statements made by scientists. I'll give you a chance to write that down. I'm going to say it again. Scientific statements are not the same as statements made by scientists. Let me give you an example of this. A scientific statement would be saying that the average gravitational pull around the globe is 9.8 meters per second squared. You can study that, you can research that, you can empirically prove that. However, a statement made by a scientist would be the late Stephen Hawking saying that because a law like gravity exists, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. That is merely his opinion. There's no empirical way of proving that because the law of gravity exists, the universe creates itself from nothing. That's his interpretation of the data. That's his belief, which seems to be the very thing that the scientific community is pushing back against. Belief. There's this new religion. Now, nobody would call it a religion, but if it looks like a religion, sounds like a religion, acts like a religion, it's a religion, okay? There's a new religion out that's kind of referred to as scientism. And the belief of scientism is this, that science is the ultimate tool in pursuing and knowing truth. That you can't find truth outside of science. In fact, Bertrand Russell said this. He said, whatever knowledge is attainable, it must be obtained by scientific methods. And what science cannot discover, mankind cannot know. This is just his opinion. This isn't a fact. This is a statement made by a scientist, not a scientific statement. What do we do with issues of art and music and literature? Science can't explain those sorts of things. Is there something that science can tell us about patience and kindness and goodwill towards mankind that religion doesn't do a far better job of explaining? Statements like this are scientific philosophy, but they are really just people's own personal belief system. And here's the danger when it comes to scientific philosophy, is that it stretches science beyond what it is logically made to do. Science can actually push us past the truth. I want to read a quote. It's long and it's complex, but I think we need to understand what we are kind of facing in our culture and our world today. This is from geneticist and atheist Richard Lewontin. He says, our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. Again, he's perpetuating the idea that science and religion are at war. They're not. But he says we, speaking for scientists, we take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs. It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material, a naturalistic explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, here's the most important part. Don't miss this. On the contrary, we are forced as scientists by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and to create a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. This is extremely honest language, but this is maybe some of the most irrational thought pattern ever. What Richard is saying in this quote is that science comes in with preconceived notions and creates experiments to produce those preconceived notions. That is the opposite of science. Real science is about following the evidence wherever it leads, even if you don't like the results. You see, scientific methodology is awesome. It is a wonderful tool. Our lives are enhanced so much by methodology. But science as a philosophy is a very slippery slope, and one that can often draw us further away from the knowledge and truth that we want to seek. That's the second thing to remember. There's a difference between methodology and philosophy. Finally, I want to look at clues for a creator. That's number 3 on your sheet, clues for a creator. What sort of scientific evidence is there that would help us lean more on the side of deism, more on the side of intelligent design, more on the side of God than strict naturalism or materialism? And there are so many different things to talk about. Again, we got, 15 minutes left. There's not any way to cover them all, okay? But I want to talk through 3 different clues or evidences we have that can point us more and more towards the idea of a creator behind it all. The first one is this. It's called the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument, to be fair, is a philosophical argument. We need to keep that in mind when we talk about, methodology versus philosophy. Basically, the cosmological argument, it's been around for centuries. It's 3 premises. It's everything that began to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe must have had a cause. Now, this might seem kind of basic or elementary to some of us, but what we need to understand is that it's not until relatively recently that science has come to find this out. For most of scientific history, we thought that the universe was eternal. It's only been within about the last 100 years that discoveries have shown that the universe did have a beginning from a singularity point. Modern scientists today think that the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. Now again, I want to remind us, we're not trying to prove Christianity today, okay? Some of us just got a little uptight right there with 13.8 billion. We're just talking about a creator behind it all, okay? And I'll tell you this from my personal opinion. You don't have to agree with me or not. I don't really care that much whether it's billions of years old or 6,000 years old. We can discuss that. It's interesting. I don't personally care that much whether it was done by the Big Bang or something else. What matters the most to me is who's behind it all. Who is the one who created the universe? And the cosmological argument doesn't necessarily prove that there was a creator, but it gives us a way of viewing the scientific evidence that we have, that the universe did have a beginning. God serves as the first uncaused cause, if you want to get technical, to the creation of the universe. And for those of us who are Christians, again, maybe not everybody, but Man, this is something that we've known for a long time. In the very beginning of our Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Science has just recently come to understand that there was creation, something that we as believers have held on to for a long time. Likewise, in Romans, we read from the Apostle Paul that ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. And so people, humankind, we have no excuse for not knowing God. Cosmological argument says there was a creator behind it, an uncaused cause that started the whole universe. It's common for scientists today who don't want to kind of look at this beginning of the universe. One of the leading theories to fight against the cosmological argument is something called abiogenesis, or basically that life started from non-life. There's a lot of research being done. It's a growing field, but here's the thing we need to understand about abiogenesis. It is a scientifically unsupportable claim. There have been no research, no experiments, no anything in the natural world or in the laboratory world that can produce life from non-life. In fact, everything we know about science today says that is not possible. There had to be someone behind it all, some intelligent mind, God, whatever we want to call it. To refute, to fight against the cosmological argument, the flip side of that is basically to say there was nothing, something happened to the nothing to become something, then something happened to the something, now we have everything. I personally think, and so do many other scientists, it takes a higher level of faith to believe that than to believe that there is a supernatural deity behind it all. The reality is that science has no way of explaining in a natural sense why the world came into existence, why the universe. And by definition, if there is no natural reason, then there must be a supernatural reason. That's the cosmological argument. Another argument, another clue for a creator is called the teleological argument. That's number 2 there. The teleological argument is all about the specificity and the complexity of the universe as we know it. On the specific side of things, there are these fixed cosmic laws that govern the way our universe works. Everything from the force of attraction between atoms, from the speed of light to here on our Earth, the tilt of the Earth, distance from the sun, how far away Jupiter is from us, and how it protects us from basically space junk flying into the world. All of these things, there are about 20 to 120 or so fixed cosmic constants based on who you ask. But here's the thing about these laws that govern our universe, these equations, these very precise, specific mathematical constants. If even one of them were off, sometimes by as little as a millionth of a percent, life would not be possible on the earth. And in many instances, the entire universe would cease to exist. The universe is so specifically fine-tuned for existence. On the complex side of things, it takes about 2 billion lines of code written by about 25,000 engineers at data centers all over the world to run what we call Google. In relation to that, inside our cells as human beings, there are about 3 billion letters of unique genetic code running us. A far more superior and complex system than Google. Nobody, if we were to look at the code that runs Google, nobody would say, well, that just happened. Obviously, it was designed, and how much more should that be the logical conclusion when we look, even if you only look at the DNA of human beings. Not only was there a designer behind it, but man, surely there is somebody behind running this thing and keeping us together. And again, we see that this is something that Christians have believed ever since Christianity has been around. In Colossians 1, we read that he existed before anything else, and he holds all creation together. Right here, in about 11 words, you get both the cosmological and the teleological argument all in one. It's God. There is a creator. Many scientists who don't want to accept, kind of the specified complexity of our world, their reason, or the way that they say our universe came to be, is to say, well, it's just a matter of chance. It's just by chance it happened, and there's a whole multiverse theory that we don't need to get into, but there's a guy, his name is Sir Fred Hoyle. He was the founding director of the Institute of Theoretical Astronomy at Cambridge University. You don't need to know that. He just sounds pretty smart, right? He formulated, he worked out the numbers to see what are the chances that the universe as we know it today, with all of these constants, with all these things driving it, what are the chances that this could just happen out of nowhere? And he found that it was about 1 in 10 to the 40,000th power. None of us even know what the heck that number means, okay? That is bigger than the human mind can even conceive. In fact, in the visible universe, there are estimated 10 to the 80th atoms. What does 10 to the 40,000th mean? We have no idea, but the chance of the universe just happening to be like it is as statistically impossible as you could possibly get. Dr. Norman Geisler, in his book When Skeptics Ask, says this about chance. Chance is not a scientific explanation. Science about the present is based on observation and repetition, and chance by its very nature is not a regular and repeated event. Science about the past is based on the principle of uniformity, but our uniform experience in the present informs us that only intelligent causes are regularly connected to specified complexity. Therefore, it's the only logical conclusion. It follows that only an intelligent being, not chance, can serve as a scientific solution to the origin of life. Chance is, at best, a lazy argument to shift logical thought away from logical conclusions based on the specific complexity of our universe. That's the teleological argument. Finally, there's just some issues with evolution. There are some concerns with evolution. Now, Darwin's theory of evolution has, pretty much ever since it was written, long been kind of the cornerstone of our understanding of modern biology. And Darwin's theory of evolution certainly does provide us with some framework for understanding why there's so much, varied life forms on the earth. There's no doubt that evolution can happen on a micro scale as adaptation inside of a single species. But when you move beyond that to this macro evolution, species changing to other species, there's just some things that, we should push the brakes and we should ask some questions. Is the theory of evolution really what our professors and all of the textbooks seem to make it out to be? If you think about evolution, I think one of the biggest issues that plagues it still to this day is the lack of fossil evidence to support it. When you look at the geology, it just does not line up with Darwin's theory. In fact, this is something he wrote about himself in his landmark book, The Origin of Species. He says, why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links, these species transitioning from one to another? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And he says himself, the creator of this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be argued against my theory. The reality is that pro-evolutionist scientists have very limited fossil records to support their claim. Some that they've brought up in the past have been disproven already, and the things that remain are so extremely controversial. The geology in the earth does not support Darwin's theory of evolution. When we're talking about evolution, it's also important to think just beyond kind of the geological side of things, but how does evolution explain some of the more philosophical sides of our human existence? Things like love, and again, appreciation of beauty and music and consciousness and emotions. Darwin's theory cannot explain why when we look at a sunset or look at the Grand Tetons, we are filled with wonder and awe. There's no survival of the fittest that would lend itself to produce those kinds of responses. Also, I read in one of the books this week a kind of humorous view of evolution. The author described evolution as the goo to you via the zoo. It rhymes, so of course I like it, right? But here's the thing. If that's true, if Darwin's theory of evolution is true, that we are just primordial goo plus a lot of time and a lot of change, how do we even trust our own thoughts then? If we're just the result of random things happening, Darwin's theory says survival above all else, including above truth. There's no guarantee that if we evolved, we can even trust our own rational thought. I know that in our world right now, and maybe if you remember back to your college classes, maybe you're taking them right now, evolution is touted as like the premier theory. We know this is true. This has to be true, on and on and on. How dare you question evolution? But I want to remind us that as a world, we've thought lots of things were true that were later proven to not be. For way longer than evolution is around, people thought that the earth was the center of the universe until we discovered that it wasn't. In our recent history, doctors thought that bloodletting was the premier way to do medicine until we discovered that it wasn't. Darwin's theory of evolution is interesting. I don't think we need to be afraid of it. We can look into it and research it, but here's the reality. There are huge leaps of faith required to believe in evolution. If faith is required there, why isn't faith allowed when it comes to intelligent design or a creator behind it all? Listen, this question today, what about science? There are people, and maybe even some of us, we think, there's never been any conclusive empirical evidence to prove the existence of God. And you're right, there hasn't. But you know what else there isn't? Any conclusive empirical evidence to disprove the existence of God either. Those things, science can only look at the observable universe. But yet, by definition, God exists outside of this universe, at least in some sort of sense. I'm going to use an example I heard from Bishop Robert Barron. Just think about the Harry Potter novels. There's 7 Harry Potter novels, and in them there's over 1 million different words describing people and places and events and Quidditch and food and Hogwarts and sorting hats and all these different things, right? And you could jump into the pages of the Harry Potter universe and you could study and you could learn everything about it and you could memorize the, hallways in the Hogwarts school and learn all the difference about. You could absolutely study everything you can about that universe. But you know what you'd never find? J.K. Rowling. Because J.K. Rowling exists outside of the Harry Potter universe. Now, all of the words we read and the characters and the things that happen, they all came from her mind and point to her. But you cannot prove her existence by being confined to the Harry Potter universe. It's the exact same thing with God. Science cannot prove on its own God's existence or his non-existence. And I just think for all of us, man, when we think about science and faith and how the two work together, what if we just learn to live with both of them? I think it's this false dichotomy that as science goes up, that means God has to go down. No. That would be like saying as Google Maps go up, as Instagram pictures go up, our desire to travel goes down. That's not true. In fact, the more we see pictures and what Google Earth shows about the earth, the more we want to travel, the more we want to see it for ourselves. And I just think, let's do the same thing with science. The more science can reveal how the universe works, the more that should draw us to an appreciation and wonder of the creator of the universe. The more we learn about how, the more we can seek God to know the answers why. Let's not pit the two against each other, but let's adopt a world view that says both science and faith can live together and, in fact, give us a more complete understanding of our existence and the universe that we live in. And especially for those of us who are Christians, I want to challenge us with this, that we would have the same heart that David had when he wrote these words. Teach me your ways, O Lord, that I may live according to your truth. Those of us that are Christians, we believe that God is the source of all truth. Scientific truth, spiritual truth, any other type of truth. God, teach me your truth. Grant me purity of heart so that I may honor you. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for truth. Thank you for equipping us with minds that can discover and that can seek out knowledge and understanding. Father, I thank you for science. Thank you for the people that have discovered and researched and helped to create a better world for us to live in. But Father, I ask that you would help us never forget that you are behind it all, that you are the creator, that you are the sustainer, that you are the thing that gives our universe and our lives purpose. Father, what David wrote to teach us your ways, God, do that for each one of us. Teach us your ways. Share with us your truth. Father, give us hearts that desire to know you more. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.